300,000 babies. Not lost, not abandoned, not swept away in a catastrophe. Sold. In broad daylight, in modern hospitals, by doctors in white coats and nuns in habits. And every single mother, for 60 years, was handed the exact same lie. Your baby died. We've already buried it. It's better if you don't look. They believed it until the DNA test came back, and the child they mourned their entire life answered the phone. At first, I thought I had already seen the worst systems ever built to separate children from their families. The orphan trains in America, the Verdinkaden in Switzerland. But then I found Spain. And Spain was different. Because the mothers who lost their children here didn't sign surrender forms. They were told their babies were dead. And the infants were handed out the back door with a brand new birth certificate. Before we go further, you need to understand what Spain looked like in 1939, because the horror only makes sense in context. The Civil War had just ended. Hundreds of thousands were dead. The prisons were overflowing. The Catholic Church stepped in to manage the chaos. They ran the hospitals. They ran the maternity wards. They placed genuine war orphans with loyal families. I don't dispute that the trauma was real. The orphans were real. What I dispute is this. When the genuine orphans ran out, the system didn't stop. It just started making new ones. Where were the parents? Because no one ever answers that. And this is where the story changes. This system of adopting out the children of the defeated didn't start as a charitable impulse. It started as a calculated, scientific medical ideology. The regime needed a medical justification to take children away from mothers who ideologically opposed them. They found it in a man named Dr. Antonio Vallejo-Nájera. He was the head of the military psychiatric services. He had trained in psychiatric clinics in Nazi Germany, and he developed a theory about what he called the red gene. The theory was explicit. Official military psychiatry records and publications from 1939 documented Vallejo-Nájera's thesis. A priori, it seems probable that psychopaths of all types would join the Marxist ranks. We presume those fanatics who fought with arms will show schizoid temperaments. Those are his exact words. He testified that political opposition was a mental illness, a genetic defect. His clinical conclusion was terrifyingly simple. The only way to save the Spanish race from this genetic retardation was to physically remove the children from their infected parents the moment they were born. That wasn't just a medical diagnosis. That was the foundational policy. They marched into the women's prisons, took the infants directly from the arms of political dissidents, and reassigned them to wealthy, loyalist families. They convinced themselves they were saving the children's souls. But that was 1939. By the 1960s, the Civil War was a distant memory. The political prisoners were mostly gone. But the machinery was still there. The pristine network of doctors, private clinics, and nuns was fully operational. And they had accidentally discovered something astonishingly profitable. There was a massive, quiet demand for babies from wealthy, conservative couples who couldn't conceive naturally. And there was an endless supply of poor, single, or marginalized women giving birth in charity hospitals. The ideology had quietly evolved. It was no longer exclusively about purifying the state. It was a business. And this is where the records disappear. Imagine being a young mother in Madrid in 1969. You go to the San Ramón clinic. You endure the pain of labor. You give birth. You hear your baby cry for the very first time. The nurse takes the infant away to be washed. You wait. An hour passes, then 2. Then a nun walks into your hospital room with a grim, practiced look on her face. She tells you there were severe complications. The baby didn't make it. You scream, you cry, you demand to see the body of your child. She shakes her head sympathetically. She tells you it's too traumatic. The hospital has already taken care of the baptism and the burial. It's for the best. You go home empty-handed. You mourn for the rest of your life. But the real horror wasn't what they told the mothers. It was what they kept in the freezer. The investigative files are chilling. A 2011 police investigation into the San Ramón clinic revealed the horrifying mechanics of the deception. The police report stated, an investigator found that the clinic kept a frozen newborn cadaver to show parents who insisted on seeing their deceased child. That is the official investigative finding. A frozen cadaver. If a mother screamed too loudly, if a father demanded absolute proof, the staff didn't panic. They just went to the freezer. They brought out the frozen remains of an unrelated infant and showed it to the grieving parents. The parents wept, they accepted the tragedy, and they went home shattered, while their actual living, breathing baby was carried out a side door, handed to a wealthy couple in a waiting taxi, and given an entirely new identity. It was a perfectly designed assembly line of tragedy. That was 1969. The war had been over 30 years. Spain was modernizing, the economy was growing, but behind the clean hospital walls, the machinery was still running, and it wouldn't stop for another 20 years. Let me introduce you to Inés Madrigal. She was born in 1969 at that exact clinic, San Ramón in Madrid. The man who signed her birth certificate was Dr. Eduardo Vela, the powerful medical director of the clinic. For 41 years, Inés believed she was simply an adopted child. Her adoptive mother always told her she was a special gift. But in 2010, Inés read a newspaper article about the niños robados, the stolen babies of Spain. She went to her adoptive mother and demanded the truth. And her adoptive mother, who was deeply religious and unaware of the full, dark criminality of the process, confessed. She hadn't adopted Inés through a legal agency. She had paid a massive fee to the hospital. Dr. Eduardo Vela had simply handed the newborn baby to her in the clinic, taking the cash, and told her to stuff a pillow under her dress to fake a pregnancy on the train ride home. The system didn't need to hide Inés. It didn't need to put her on an orphan train out west. It just needed to file her away under a different name. By forging the birth certificate, Dr. Vela erased Inés Madrigal's biological mother from existence. He made the adoptive mother the biological mother on official state paper. Legally, there was no adoption. Legally, the transaction never happened. You could try to blame this on a few bad apples, a few corrupt doctors taking advantage of disorganized hospital records in a country still rebuilding after decades of dictatorship. You could blame the massive gap in documentation on typical bureaucratic incompetence. But then you look at the trial of 2018. Inés Madrigal took Dr. Eduardo Vela to court. He was 85 years old. The very first person to ever stand trial for the stolen babies of Spain. The courtroom heard the mountain of evidence. The forged signatures, the missing hospital archives that were supposedly burned in a mysterious fire. They played the journalistic sting where Vela was caught on hidden camera casually admitting he gave the baby away without the mother's consent. The verdict was the culmination of decades of silence. The Madrid Provincial Court ruling, 2018, laid out the absolute facts. The judges wrote that it was indisputably proved that Eduardo Vela committed the crimes of child abduction, faking a birth, and falsifying official childbirth records. Those are the exact words of the court. Indisputably proved.
Inés Madrigal stood in that echoing courtroom as the judge finally admitted it was all real. It took 50 years to get a Spanish court to say the words. The system was real. The theft was real. The judges acknowledged that Dr. Vela delivered a baby girl outside of legal channels, simulating a birth that never occurred, destroying a family with the stroke of a pen. Inés Madrigal stepped outside the courthouse to face the flashing cameras and said, "I'm happy because it's been proven that I was stolen. Dr. Vela stole me." And then she said the words that defined an entire forgotten generation. We were Europe's baby supermarket, and babies were stolen for 60 years. But that's not the part that keeps me up at night. Here is the part that breaks the illusion of justice. Dr. Eduardo Vela was found objectively guilty of all charges. But he never spent a single second in a prison cell. He was acquitted. Why? Because of the law. The Spanish legal code, specifically Section 131 regarding the statute of limitations. The court ruled that Madrigal had a 10-year legal deadline to file a complaint for unlawful detention, counting from the day she turned 18. That was the legal loophole. That was the institutional escape hatch. Because the crime was hidden so flawlessly, because Inés didn't even know she was stolen until she was 41 years old, the clock had run out before she even knew a crime was committed. Dr. Vela walked out of that courthouse a free man. The system protected itself absolutely perfectly. The law that was supposed to deliver justice became the exact mechanism that shielded the architects of the erasure.
Let's look at the pattern. There's one detail that most documentaries skip. The theft didn't stop when General Franco died in 1975. Spain transitioned to a modern, thriving democracy. The dictatorship ended, but the children kept disappearing. Right up until 1990. Inside a modern European democracy, fully integrated into the global world, the system just kept running. Until 2018, when the first doctor finally stood trial. The theft was proven, and he walked away completely free. Coincidence or sequence? You decide. This wasn't an accident. It was an industry. Estimates range from 30,000 to 300,000 babies stolen over half a century. The exact number will never be known because the true records were deliberately destroyed. Inés Madrigal eventually took an international DNA test. Because the domestic records were useless, she used a global database. She connected with a distant cousin in America, who then connected her to her biological siblings in Spain. She finally found out who she was. She found out where she came from. But she also found out that her biological mother, Pilar, had died in 2013 at the age of 73. Pilar spent her entire adult life grieving a child she never lost. She died never knowing. Inés found out too late. The babies didn't disappear. They grew up. They got married. They had children of their own. There are people walking the streets of Madrid, Barcelona, and Valencia right now in their 40s and 50s who have absolutely no idea who they are. Many of them still have no idea that the person who raised them bought them. They visit the graves of the parents who paid for them, while their real mothers visit empty plots, weeping over tiny coffins that hold nothing but stones. The church archives remain fiercely sealed. The records were deliberately destroyed. The doctors took their secrets to the grave. But every day, a DNA database makes one more match, and somewhere in Spain, a phone rings, and someone finds out, for the first time, who they actually are. The question is still here. It never went anywhere. I'm currently working on a follow-up investigating the convict leasing system in America, where records were legally manipulated to erase freedom. Because the stolen babies of Spain were not the only people erased by paperwork.